to be fine 1 minute and then all of a sudden you get this sharp abdominal pain and then you're running to the bathroom and you're throwing up. And then I'm laying on the floor. I'm drenched in sweat. My shirt is soaked through. It's like I jumped in a swimming pool. That's how much sweat. Like, that's how bad it can get.
Welcome to the BEET Pain Podcast, where we learn what actually works for pain relief, staying healthy, and navigating the medical world. I'm your host, Brandon Cope. My guest today shares her experiences with fainting, blood pressure, and mobility. Training to be a scientist in microbiology at Northwestern University, she runs marathons, snowboards, rock climbs, and more. She's a writer for The Mighty and is joined today by her two dogs, Maddie and Griffy, who pop in to say hello. This is my conversation with Yujia Ding. Yujia, I am so excited to have you on today. You have learned many things about your body, and you've been through many experiences, which we'll get into, but your life changed one day with a flight of stairs. Can you tell me about the day that you fell?
Hey, thanks for having me on the podcast today. Yeah, I can definitely tell you about my experiences with the stairs. That was probably the scariest moment of my life. I can preface that with I've fainted before. Essentially what happened on the stairs was I passed out. But falling down a flight of stairs was, I think, the moment when I realized I needed to change something in my life. Essentially what happened that day was I was standing casually talking with my friend. I was at my friend's place and we were just hanging out talking, and I was getting ready to leave. She was getting ready to drive me home, and so she's on the second floor. So we were walking down the stairs, and it's sort of those stairs where there's like one flight, like 6-7 steps, and then it turns a corner and then it goes up another 6-7 steps to get to the next floor. So I went down the first set of 6 or 7 stairs perfectly fine. And I'm standing on that half landing, sort of just talking with her. And then the next thing I remember is I'm sitting up staring at her from the bottom of the steps. Wow. And I have no recollection of what happened. I looked up at her and I was like, why are you standing there? She was still at the railing on the middle of the second flight of stairs, just sort of standing there staring at me. Her mouth was open and I was like, why are you standing there? I couldn't figure out what happened. I couldn't figure out I was sitting down.
Wow.
And it was just a moment of why can't I remember anything? And she was in such a moment of shock that she couldn't even respond to me that I had passed out. She just saw me completely collapse, go limp, and just, I guess I slid down the stairs. I can't even tell you how I felt. I just remember sitting on the bottom step.
Wow, that's almost surreal. I mean, that's really confusing, and that's a very scary moment in life to have something like that happen. I mean, so her description is that you just kind of like, you just like sort of slumped over at the top of the stairs or something. I mean, you just kind of like toppled down them and ended up at the bottom.
She said I just went limp, and I don't think she could even gather what happened. It happened so fast. She just said she just saw me fall.
Wow.
And then I just remember looking up and asking her why she was still standing at the top of the steps. I thought she followed me down because I thought I walked down the steps.
Okay. Wow. I mean, that's totally traumatic and really frightening to have that happen. What did you do from there next? Did you go see the doctor? Did she take you to the hospital? What happened right after that?
So what happened right after that was that I threw up.
Okay.
Which was really bizarre. I don't even I sometimes forget that I threw up, and it's sort of one of those things where you block it out and you're like, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, that's just not real. That's not possible.
Yeah.
But I remember throwing up, and then she just took me to her car. Like, once I gathered my strength and really like regrouped myself, got to the car, she drove me home, made sure I made it upstairs. We didn't really go to the doctor or anything like that. It was like 9 or 10 at night. And I just went home, rested. I felt fine the next morning, but then I remember emailing my doctor and being like, hey, this just happened and I'm really confused because this is the first time I've passed out. But it's the first time I fell down a flight of stairs and don't recall anything. And so my doctor was like, why don't you come on in? And so we came in, we did a few just basic orthostatic tests, essentially just sitting, standing, measuring blood pressure and heart rate. And then she would test me also when I stood. And
is that Griffy?
Up. Sorry, yeah, that was Maddie, actually. Griffy's fine.
Oh, okay. All right.
Maddie had a few things to say there. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. We like it when she contributes.
Yeah, she had a few things to say about me passing out, I guess. She's like, not okay.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah, that was my little one, Maddie. But yeah, so essentially I went to the doctor, and then she did a few things where, like, even if I just sat down and stood up just to get to the exam table, I would tell her I was like dizzy.
Okay, wow.
And so we went over my history, and she was like, no, you've mentioned this like standing up dizziness thing before, but we never really connected it with anything, thinking that it was maybe just I wasn't hydrated enough, or that, the weather was off, or I was not eating properly because of my history with just an eating disorder. It was also like, okay, what is actually going on? Is she just not well nourished, type of thing? But then with the passing out, because the stairs was probably the third time I had passed out in a series of like a year.
Okay.
So with the stairs, it was sort of the culminating incident of like, hold up, let's go back and look at your history, and let's try to piece things together, because something is actually not right.
Okay. So before the stairs, you had some kind of fainting spells before,
Yes.
but they weren't quite as serious as the stairs.
I don't know if you can say serious or not. I mean, I fell from my height of like 5'6" and hit my head on concrete.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But it's not as traumatic, because I remember waking up instantly and being like, oh, I passed out. Like, I recall, it wasn't long that I was out, and I knew exactly what happened. The stairs was one of those where I was like, I didn't even think I passed out. I thought I tripped.
Okay, so it was kind of the memory and the confusion that made it different.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because everything else, I stepped out on an elevator, and then I completely passed out, hit my head. But I recall stepping out of the elevator, and I recall falling.
So when you went to the doctor, they did a postural orthostatic assessment on you. What is that assessment?
Yeah, definitely. So that assessment is a quick and easy test. It requires no machines. I guess you could say a blood pressure cuff. That's really all you need.
Okay.
What you do is you lay down on an exam table. You sort of level out your system, let your system recuperate to a setting of, okay, now I'm laying down. And then they take your blood pressure, and they take your heart rate. So this is sort of like a baseline of like, okay, so for example, your heart rate and blood pressure is like 50 beats per minute and 90/60 blood pressure. Okay, cool. We're at a baseline. So then you sit up. You just sit up however you sit up normally. Sometimes they tell you to sit up slowly, but really it's about how your body recovers going against gravity, right? Because you're laying down and you're sitting up. And so they sit up, and then within 30 seconds, they measure your blood pressure and your heart rate again. And so this tells the doctor, like, okay, when you're going against gravity and you're changing positions, how is your body reacting? It's a quick test to see, is your body recovering? Because usually what happens is your blood pressure will go down because of the gravity. You're trying to recover and circulate all that blood. And then you need to raise your heart rate to compensate for the lower blood pressure.
Okay.
Essentially, when you raise your heart rate, you're increasing circulation, and then you're trying to boost up that blood pressure again. So it's sort of like a cyclical process.
Okay. So when you did this, what happened for you?
So my blood pressure either stays around the same or drops a little bit, which shouldn't. I mean, that's pretty normal. That's okay. Like, my blood pressure is already low, and it doesn't drop drastically. I remember one instant where it dropped like from like 90/60 to like 80/40, and they're like, "Wait, where did it go?" But that was like a freak incident, because normally when I do these orthostatic tests, the telling sign of something's not going right is that my heart rate actually doesn't recover.
Interesting.
So the weird thing is my blood pressure will stay low, and it'll stay low. It'll drop a little, drop a few points. So that, like, if it starts at 90/60, it might go over 85/55, right? Like, throughout the course of laying to sitting and sitting to standing, because sitting to standing is the last part of the test.
Okay.
So, it'll drop a few points. It's not like drastic. But the thing is, my heart rate will sometimes drop even lower. So if it starts at 55 beats per minute, sometimes it'll go down to 50 or 49.
Wow.
And it just keeps dropping. So something's not compensating in my body. That's why I get lightheaded and dizzy, because then I get a reduced blood flow. Essentially, because one system is not compensating for the other. I mean, your body knows how to compensate, and mine just sort of shuts down and is like, okay, we're done.
Okay. So that blood flow imbalance when you're, lying down, when you're sitting up, the amount of pressure that's being caused throughout your body, that was causing kind of these fainting spells that you were having.
Yeah. I mean, essentially what they were saying was so one of the classic symptoms is I get dizzy when I stand up. That natural progression of going from sitting to standing, every day you do it. For me, I have to be extra careful, because if I do it just even a regular pace as anyone else, I can get lightheaded because my system is not compensating. My blood pressure is taking too long to rebound, and then my heart rate is not pumping that blood flow to my brain. So my brain is being deprived of oxygen, essentially.
Okay. All right. So then you found that information out when you went and saw the doctor. And then what did they want you to do with that? What changed for you that the doctor recommended afterwards?
Yeah, so definitely that was a scary, like, oh my goodness. Well, it was scary and good at the same time, because at first I thought something was just wrong in my head. I was like, okay, my head's going crazy. I'm like losing it. I'm just passing out, and something's wrong with me.
Okay.
But then to find out that physically something could actually be wrong was a little bit calming, to be honest.
Yeah.
But then to actually get a formal diagnosis of what is classified as like an autonomic nervous system condition, which is sort of what we're talking about. We're in the ballpark of like autonomic nervous system, where your body is sort of just functioning on its own. Well, I had to go see a neurologist or a cardiologist or something, like a specialist, essentially.
Okay.
Luckily for me, in the healthcare system that I was at when I was living out in the Midwest, there was a really good neurologist, but his wait list was 1.5 years.
Wow.
So my doctor was like, we're expediting this. We're getting you in next week because there's an appointment and you can't say no to it because I've expedited it. But you need to go see this doctor because it's unacceptable that you're passing out. And really the stairs was the key. Like, she fell down a flight of stairs. She's like in her early 20s. She should not be doing this.
Right.
Red flag.
Okay.
So I went to go see the neurologist. He did a variety of tests. Again, did the orthostatic standing, sitting, laying test, just your generic test. Did a lot of blood pressure things, measured heart rate, did an echocardiogram to look at my heart. But then the classic test for diagnosing an autonomic nervous system condition is a table tilt test, or a TTT. Essentially what they do is they strap you down to a table, stick a bunch of wires on you, and then they move the table so they can control the table. So you're laying down, and then they'll measure like baseline tests and baseline numbers, oxygen, heart rate, blood pressure, everything like that. They measure it like every 30 seconds or something.
Okay.
Something like that. I don't remember the exact details, but basically you're laying on this table, and then they slowly start to lift you up. So the table will adjust from laying flat, 180 degrees, to where you're standing at 90 degrees.
Okay.
And they do this at increments, like set intervals, set angles. And at every angle they pause and they take your blood pressure and your heart rate and look at, how your symptoms are. You tell them, are you dizzy? Are you faint? Et cetera, et cetera. And that is the classic, like, that was the main test that really made me realize, like, yeah, my body's not functioning at 100%, because I felt crappy. I mean, just going from laying to standing, granted, it's really jolting to be standing upright on a table because you're actually more than upright. It's sort of awkward.
Okay.
But the fact that I did that and I would get dizzy and lightheaded, I was like, okay, something's not right. I'm in a controlled medical environment. I've done no exercise. And yet here I am, lightheaded. Like, what is going on?
Yeah, I would imagine that would be kind of a scary and uncomfortable day for you. I mean, first of all, when you tell me you're strapped down to a table with wires attached to you, that sounds scary just to begin with.
Yes.
Right there, like out of a strange movie or something.
Yes.
But you're kind of getting this movement done that almost feels unnatural, getting lifted up like that and then becoming dizzy. Did you feel like going through that whole doctor visit, at the end of the visit, you learned something about your body that was like comforting to know that information, or did it almost make you feel a little bit more uncomfortable in a certain way?
I think it was a combination of both. I have to say, I think the neurologist and the treatment team made me feel a lot more comfortable than I think I actually was.
Okay.
Because they walked you through it. It was literally like hand holding. Like, they were like, we will hold your hand if you need to, like, it was so great. The nurses were like, don't freak out. Like, it's okay. They could tell I was anxious, like, just going into the test. But they're like, just breathe. Like, it's okay. We can stop it at any time if you get uncomfortable. So I think looking back, it's like, I felt way more uncomfortable if you remove the medical team. But with the medical team, I was like, oh, okay, I'm okay. Like, I'm in safe hands. And I didn't get the results till like a few days later, but when I got the results, it was like, oh, you have, your body is not functioning right, and you're just missing the like diagnostic criteria for like a classic autonomic nervous system condition.
I'm curious just to contrast a little bit, you're talking
Mhm.
about how the medical staff, they were
Yeah.
empathetic, like they totally got how you were feeling and what was going on with you.
Yeah.
And you had been kind of talking about how you felt like some of these things could have been in your head, like maybe
Yeah.
you're just imagining something and there was something, oh, there's something wrong with me, or maybe I'm
Right.
just sort of like thinking there's something wrong with me, but
Right.
there's not. I mean, how did kind of your community, friends, family react when they found out, oh, like she does actually have something that the doctors are diagnosing and seeing that is wrong, and it's not something that's just in her head? What was kind of that reaction from community when you went and you started talking to them about what was going on with you?
Definitely. I actually have to say my community was pretty small, and it still is pretty small. I'm pretty limited in who I keep close to me, who knows, most of my medical history. But when I told the people that were close to me, especially that friend that saw me pass out, she was like,
Mhm.
"Good. Like, I didn't think it was in your head, but it's comforting to know that it's not something that's like drastically wrong with you, that it can be treated." But it was also, she was like, "Oh, it's comforting to know that there's something physically that we can target and we can look out for." Because she was like, "Now I
Yeah.
know when I'm with you, if you get this certain look on your face, you're going to pass out," or whatever
Right.
it was. So
Right.
it was very comforting. To be honest, my family was a little bit more skeptical, because they're like, "Well, we all have low blood pressure. Like, you've passed out before. What's going on?"
Hmm.
So that's been a little bit more of a journey. It's been a lot better, especially since my one of my parents had an episode of faint, like near fainting, near syncope is what they call it.
Oh, interesting.
And so it was funny, because I was talking to my parents about this, and then my parents go, "Yeah, I had an episode of that, and now I get what you mean when you pass out." I was like, "See, like, you do it because you were in the heat and you weren't hydrated and you were like panicked.
Yeah.
Like, that's normal. You pass out when you're in the heat, you're not hydrated, and you're panicked. Like, anybody
Hmm.
will do that because your body just shuts down." I
Hmm.
was like, on a daily like occasion that could happen to me. And then they're like, "Oh, and so that's why you use Griffy." Because my parents are like, "Oh, I use the wall to like lower myself so I didn't pass out." And I was like, "Yeah, see, that's what Griffy's for." So like it's been a little bit more of a struggle, but we're getting
Yeah, yeah, and we'll totally talk about Griffy.
there.
We're hearing Griffy and Maddie, your
Yeah.
two dogs in the
Yep.
background. We're totally going to talk about them. We're going to include them too.
Yes.
But I think you have such a great point here, just how
Mhm.
when people have different conditions, they're sort of mysterious. They're kind of like not
Yeah.
the regular condition. It's not like, oh, I broke my arm. It's
Yeah.
something you can't really like see.
Yeah.
It's hard for people to imagine like tangibly what's going on with you.
Right.
They just kind of see you do weird things, and it's like, but they're weird. Like, what are they doing? I don't
Yeah.
understand. I think it could be really hard for people not only to connect, but also to like believe that that's a real thing.
Mhm.
And people feel, you know, how am I supposed to like help this person or interact with them?
Right.
Or, what does this mean for our relationship or
Right.
our connection in some way? It can be really, really strange for people. So I appreciate you kind of sharing
Mhm.
your own experience. And I think that that can be so important when other people, not necessarily that I want other people to have different conditions, but when they kind of get that
Right.
little taste of something, it's like, oh, that's what you meant with
Mhm.
that. I totally get that now. I think it really helps people connect really well
Mhm.
with the community of people who are in chronic pain or have
Right.
different mobility issues or things like this. One thing that I've learned about recently,
Mhm.
apparently some medical schools are actually having doctors go through pain experiences so that they can realize more how to empathize with some of their patients, which I thought is so fascinating.
Wow.
And it almost, I mean, I don't know exactly what their pain, systems
Mhm.
are like, but it's like that's probably a great learning experience. Maybe a little
Mhm.
bit scary if you're a medical student, but
Right.
it's like that's actually a great experience to kind of figure out, oh, this is what this person feels. This is what it's like for them.
Right.
And I think it actually improves treatments and relationship with
Mhm.
people in those situations. So I appreciate you sharing some of that
Yeah.
and your experience with your family. I'm curious, what
Mhm.
is the worst of the symptoms that you've experienced? Was that the falling down the stairs and not remembering? Was that kind of the worst of what you've experienced with these fainting spells, or have there been other things that have been kind of worse or in addition to those things?
Yeah, I would say I can't classify it worst or better or anything like that. I try to avoid those scales just in general.
Okay.
I would say that was probably the like tip of the like the tipping point. Though I've had bouts of symptoms where it's funny, it actually starts with abdominal pain for me. It's weird.
Interesting.
So it's very bizarre, and some doctors we're trying to get to the bottom of this like connection between my like abdominal system and my autonomic nervous system and just how things react. One of my doctors thinks it's actually a pinching of a nerve in my back, which makes
Interesting.
total sense. So you have this vasovagal nerve that goes from like the base of your skull all the way down your back. It's like one of the longest nerves. I don't know the details of it, but basically, essentially what happens is if it gets pinched, you can get these symptoms of like lightheadedness, you want to pass out, you want to throw up because it just sets off your system. And one of my doctors thinks that that's playing a role in that, like, because of my chronic back issues, it is pinching that nerve. If I sit in a certain position, and it gets worse sometimes. Don't know how feasible that is because it's still a process of being, looking for answers.
Sure.
As with all chronic and invisible illnesses, it takes a long time to find an answer because you don't have symptoms every day.
Right.
But one of the worst times I've had is also when I get so lightheaded and I'm disoriented. So I really have no idea what's going on. But I'm aware enough where I'm like, okay, I'm going to throw up, and I'm like getting cold sweats. I'm like literally drenched in sweat. And I lay down in the bathroom, and I find a way to prop my legs up to get blood flow to my head. That's like, then all of a sudden I'll black out. And then the next thing you know, I've had instances where Griffy actually follows me into the bathroom, and he's like licking me because I'm like, what's going on? Because I'm like, one, I taste like salt because I'm sweating.
Yeah.
And two, I'm like passed out on the floor, and I don't know what happened because I'm just out of it. And then I'm out of it for like an hour and a half. Like, it is so jolting and disorienting to be fine 1 minute, and then all of a sudden you get this sharp abdominal pain, and then you're running to the bathroom and you're throwing up. You probably have like diarrhea, as like ugly as it sounds. That's true. It's just what happens is like everything in your system is just shutting down. And then I'm laying on the floor. I'm drenched in sweat. My shirt is soaked through. It's like I jumped in a swimming pool. That's how much sweat. Like, that's how bad it can get. And then I've got this like 85-pound Labrador like staring down at me like, hey, are you alive? Yeah. And you're just like, what is life right now? And I've had those where I go months and months and months without these symptoms. And then all of a sudden for a month straight, like every other day, it's that same symptom. And that actually happened in the spring, where for about a month, I couldn't eat anything without getting sick. I couldn't go anywhere. I literally was homebound because I was like, I can't function. Like, I'm going to get sick. I'm going to throw up. I can't pass out. I can't drive because you don't know what's going to happen. And, I was stuck at home. I had friends bringing me soup because they're like, you're losing weight. You're not eating. What's going on? I'm like, I don't know. Like, my system's all whack. So yeah, it comes and goes, and it's scary.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think that kind of experience is, probably very foreign for a lot of people. So,
Yes.
that could be really eye-opening. And I appreciate you letting us know what some of that experience is like. Let's talk about Griffy here for a little bit. So Griffy is your service dog. And Griffy helps you. You're talking a little bit about how Griffy will come in and kind of lick your face a little bit.
Yes.
But what else does Griffy help you with?
Definitely. So Griffy is my 85-pound English Labrador. I like to mention he's English because he's stocky and he's got this like 15-pound head. His head looks like a Rottweiler head. So you can imagine like a Rottie's head. So he doesn't look like your traditional lab at all. I go places and people are like, is that a lab? I'm like, yes, don't judge my dog. He's a lab, because he's just of a different variety. So I like to be, it's a great icebreaker, right? Because people are like, what is that? And I'm like, it's not a bat, it's a dog, first of all.
Man, that's funny.
It's great. Yeah. So I have all these great conversations with people. But Griffy is my stability mobility dog. So he has this massive harness that he wears, which, by the way, he wags his tail like it's going to fall off when he sees his harness. He gets really excited. He loves going to work. And that's one of my favorite things about Griffy is he gets so excited to do things with me. Even when we're home and his vest isn't on, he like can't leave me alone. He's like always pining to like get close to me. So it's great. But Griffy is a stability mobility dog. That's his primary function. And what he does is he gives stability and support to me. So I use his harness, which is fitted to my height. So then that way the handle is sort of right comfortable where my arm hangs in. So I can hold the harness when I'm walking. And I walk with his harness. So he keeps me stable. And what happens is I've actually had to use him before where like I get faint and lightheaded. I lean on him. So he has a command called steady where he walks in front of me, he tightens all his muscles, and I can actually use him to stand up like he's a brick wall.
Okay, wow.
So instead of standing from normal sitting to raised up, full height, and risking getting dizzy, or if I know I'm dizzy, I will use Griffy instead. So if I'm like laying on the ground and I get dizzy, but I need to stand up, I'll call Griffy over. I'll hold on to him to go from laying to sitting. And then I'll like bear hug him to get from sitting to my knees. And then I'll use the steady command to go from my knees up to my feet. And it's like a 5-minute process to stand up.
Okay.
But I use him. And so that's one of the ways I can use him as a stability dog. And then also I've actually passed out, like slumped over onto him before, which, not fun because the harness hurts, but it's way better than falling from 5.5 feet tall all the way hitting your head on the ground.
Right. Of course.
Slumping over on a dog that's like wriggling is way better than falling flat. So I've had to use him in that instances. And then the other thing that he was trained to do is if I fall anywhere, he comes and licks me immediately. Like he circles me and he starts licking me like what's going on, because when you pass out, one way to wake someone up is splash water on their face.
Right.
While in my case, I really don't want to get wet every time I pass out. So I'd rather be licked by a dog, less wet.
Much cuter.
Yes. But he does it, and he does it really well. I mean, thankfully, knock on wood, I don't have to use it as often, but I've used it in the past, and he's come to my rescue, especially like this spring when I was having my bouts of like abdominal pain, passing out symptoms. He would follow me into the bathroom, and he's really good at reading things. Even like as unpretty as it sounds, I can't take a hot bath because the temperature causes my system to shut down. I've tried, and I was taking a bath the other day, and I actually don't close the bathroom door all the way, because if I fall and I need Griffy to come in, he's able to open the door himself. So I don't close my door all the way because that's a safety issue for me.
Wow.
So it's a way I've coped, right? Because if you live by yourself, you sort of have to find a way to cope with your invisible illness, chronic illness symptoms. And I was taking a bath, and I started getting up, and I was really lightheaded. I didn't realize how lightheaded I was because I was sitting, and then the heat rises. So like it was warmer above me. And as I went to stand up, Griffy comes in and he barrels into the bathroom and comes right next to the bathtub and is like waiting for me. And it took me a second to realize like what was going on. I had this like moment of brain fog where I was like, why did my dog just intrude in my privacy? Like what is going on? And then I realized like I got dizzy instantly after that. Like I was like bang, bang. I had a thought of like, why is Griffy in here? And then I got so lightheaded. And that's when I realized like I actually used him to get out of the bathtub, because I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to fall. I've almost fallen and hit my head and slipped in the shower because I can't stand the heat.
Wow.
So even just small things like that, like the fact that he recognized it before I did, he was like, what is going on? And he like came in, and he was able to do that. Just small things like that. They're life changers.
Now, wait a minute. Were you saying that Griffy could almost like sense your dizziness? I mean, it sounded like it was hot. You were like becoming dizzy, and Griffy like came in, and you were thinking, wait, why is Griffy in here? And then you got dizzy. So Griffy almost like knew what was going to happen.
That's the thing. It's amazing. So Griffy cannot sense my blood pressure changes. So the misconception is that with a diabetic alert dog or a seizure alert dog, your body gives off pheromones. So your body gives off a smell or a scent that the dog can pick up on, which makes total sense. So like if you're dealing with blood sugar, your body tastes sweet, or your body does not taste sweet. So dogs can sense that since they have powerful senses of smell. With an autonomic nervous system condition with your blood pressure, you can't smell that. Your blood pressure gives off no scent. And so that's a misconception that some people have, is they're like, oh, he can smell blood pressure changes. I'm like, no one can smell blood pressure changes. That's not medically possible. So when people say that, I'm like, I don't think you really understand the condition, but that's a whole nother podcast episode in and of itself.
Right.
But he just knows, like he knows me. It's not that he can sense it, because there's been times where I've passed out and he's like nowhere near me, because he's like, what? Like, I didn't know, and sometimes it's so sudden that I passed out, and then he like takes 30 seconds to be like, oh wait, she's like on the ground. Like,
interesting.
So he's not sensing it, but he just knows. Like, there are times where I had this one incident one night, and I remember this clearly. I wasn't feeling well. I was having stomach pains, and I just curled up in bed, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to go to sleep, right? And Griffy normally does not sleep on my bed. He sort of sleeps on his own dog bed, but it's close by to my bed. So, you know, he doesn't like to snuggle me all the time. But this one particular night, for a good 45 minutes, the dog would not leave me alone. He kept coming over, nudging my back. I couldn't get comfortable because he kept nudging me, and I was like, leave me, like, go away. You know, I'm trying to rest. My stomach hurts. And there were a couple of times where I, like, in that 45-minute period, I got up, went to the bathroom just to, like, get him off my back. Be like, okay, fine. I'm in the bathroom. Like, I don't know what you want me to do. And then he would barricade himself, like, in the bathroom door so I can't get out. And I'm like, what is going on?
Interesting.
And so I would just step over him. I mean, he's short enough where I can step over him. And he'd, like, come back and nudge me and nudge me. And I'm like, dude, leave me, like, get off my bed. Leave me alone. I'm tired. And then all of a sudden, like, he, like, got me, like, he nudged me, and I was like, fine, I'll go to the bathroom. And then, like, within, like, a minute or something, I was, like, throwing up. And I was like, oh, this is what you wanted me to do. Like, I had no idea. But he's not sensing anything. I think he just picks up on my vibes.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow. I mean, that's a very strong dog to be able to hold up your body weight when you're falling, and incredibly smart, and just having that innate sense of what's going on, a connection to you to be able to read you and pick up on those subtle things. I mean, I could walk into the room and just be like, oh, hi, you know, what's going on with you? And I would have no idea, but your dog would totally know. And that's that's an amazing ability. I mean, that's like a superpower, which is really, you know, I maybe I should get Griffy to come and help me when I work on people in my office.
Yeah.
You know, oh, obviously this is where your pain is, you know, my diagnosing dog. But I mean, that's such a huge advantage for you. And I imagine makes you way more comfortable going out and doing things, and, you know, giving you so much independence and so much comfort with your conditions and just your regular day activities. That's really awesome to have Griffy with you.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, so, you know, Griffy helps you a lot. But you've done a lot of interesting things in your life and been able to be actually really active despite what people might think. I mean, you're talking about, you know, slumping over in bathrooms and having fainting spells and throwing up, but you don't let that stop you from being active, do you? You get out and do a lot of things.
Yes, I do.
What are some of the things that you do?
Yeah, so I definitely, one of my favorite things is to be active and do team sports. So I play softball, I do ultimate frisbee, I rock climb, I snowboard in the winter. That's probably one of my favorite things ever. It's the most challenging because of the altitude difference.
Right.
And then the biggest passion I have is marathon running. Funny enough, talking about, like, oh, how do you stay on your feet for like 5.5 hours? I've adapted, and I run. So I don't run with Griffy. That's usually the first question I get is, oh my goodness, does your dog run a marathon? I'm like, no, he can barely run a mile. But I've adapted. So I actually run with a human guide. I have a chronic diagnosable condition that I have doctor's notes of prescribing me with a service dog, saying, like, yes, a service dog would enhance her quality of life. And that helps me when I enter marathons. And I work with Achilles International. I work with the San Francisco Bay Area chapter just because that was sort of the first race I ran with them as my guides. I ran the San Francisco Marathon. And so I work with the San Francisco Bay Area Achilles International chapter. And they provide guides for me, and we do my marathons together. They know my symptoms. They know when to check in with me. They actually pace me so I don't run faster than about a 10:30 pace throughout the whole course of the marathon, because as I've tested it, being the scientist that I am, I've pushed myself to run like almost 9:30, 9:15 pace for 10 miles. And I've collapsed on the floor because I lost feeling in my legs because my body couldn't keep up with the blood flow.
Okay. Wow.
So, you know, I've tested this. I can't run faster than like a 10:30 pace. And that's okay. Like, people are like, why don't you run faster? I'm like, because I can't. Like, I physically will pass out and I will collapse because I've tried it. And it's happened. But I still do it because to me, it's like, why hold yourself back? Like, I've spent so long in this haze of like, I'm sick, I'm incapable, I'm not strong enough. I like have all these things going on in my head. And then I get this diagnosis of like, no, it's a physical condition. But then you're like, well, it's not a broken bone, so nobody can see it. So no one trusts you. And then I've slowly just come out of that haze and been like, you know what? Forget it. Like, I've taken steps to improve my life. I'm not going to let things hold me back that used to hold me back. I feel like I'm one of those people that just defy the odds of like what you can and can't do. You know, there's no can't. Like, I tell myself I can't do certain things, but then I push myself because I'm like, wait, I have to prove it to myself that I can do it.
Yeah.
You know, like on the rock climbing wall, if I'm doing like a medium, like the rating is like a 5.9, like a medium route, right? And I like can't do it. Well, then I'll keep going back at it and I'll do the same route, or I'll try to send that route like 15 times until I can do it. Cause there's no, I can't do it. There's no giving up in my life, because if I gave up, I'd be bedridden. I'd be bedbound, or I'd be like just in my apartment, not seeing sunlight, not seeing daylight, not seeing anything really. Cause I would be so scared to go out. And that's how I lived for the longest time. Even, to be honest, even the first year I had Griffy, we were still getting to know each other. I couldn't do things. I was scared to take him out. I'd be like, people are judging me. And what if he doesn't do his job? Like, what if I pass out and he like runs away because he freaks out? You know, like I had my doubts. Like, don't get me wrong. It was great to get him. But then like after that honeymoon period, you're like, oh crap. Like, what do I do? Like, I have this dog, and what if he doesn't do his job? You know, like my life is on the line, you know? And it happens. And then, you know, the past year and a half, I've had Griffy for about 2.5 years now. So the past year and a half have been great because we've gotten to know each other. He knows me, he senses me. So all these instances of him like picking up on my mood, all within the last year and a half. Nothing happened the first year. The first year was like a drag of like training issues over and over. Like, it was a nightmare. So it's not all butterflies and unicorns, you know, with the service dog. It was a lot of work. But I just go for it. There's no stopping me. Like, even on the Frisbee field, my favorite example is Griffy plays ultimate Frisbee with me. Okay. And you're probably wondering like, what the heck does that mean? I go on the field and I ask him to stay on the sideline. He won't. He's next to me. He's running up next to me. He's guarding me like a defender. He's playing Frisbee right alongside me and my friends, and everyone loves it because they're like, wow, he's such a good dog that he's like right next to you. He literally runs next to me, and he doesn't trip me. He stays on my left side in a perfect heel as I'm running up and down the field. And if I catch the Frisbee, he's like, I want to grab it, you know, like he's playing right alongside me. And I didn't train him to do that. He just did it one day, and it made me feel so much more comfortable to push myself knowing that he's there. And then there was one time I dove and I fell, and he was the first one over. Like, he came over and licked me. He was like on my tail. Like, if he loses me in the field, he's like frantic. He's like, where'd she go? Where'd she go? Like, let me find her. Yeah. And so I don't let it stop me. I mean, if Griffy can do it with me, all the better.
Yeah. I mean, your tenacity is incredible, and just how you're pushing yourself and you're just not letting anything get you down, and you're moving forward. I think that is so encouraging for so many people to hear. You know, you've had some serious, you know, scares with your body, and you have, you know, moved past that. You've, you know, found out how to get through things, how to be strong, you know, how to be independent. You're not just doing, you know, one sport, you're doing like 5 different sports, and you're doing them competitively and aggressively, and you're wanting to push yourself to the max. It's so amazing to look at your life and where you're at right now. I'm curious if you could give yourself advice back to when you first had that fall, and when you were first kind of in the midst of that fear and that unknown going forward. What kind of things would you advise yourself? How would you help yourself when in those first moments?
I think in those first moments, if I look back, I would have told myself to not panic. And I think that's like the worst advice I can give, but also the best advice, because the minute you panic, you lose sense of everything that's happening. At least for me, like the minute I start getting anxious and nervous and panic, I forget like what's going on. I forget common sense. And I'm like in this state of like, oh my goodness, life is ending. And I think the biggest thing is really letting that shock sink in and letting yourself be like, wow, this just happened. Like, having a moment of acceptance. I think that's a big key, is like, aside from like not panicking, like having that moment of just letting yourself be like, wow, I just fell down the stairs and I have no idea what happened. Like, that's okay. And accepting it and being like, okay, this is my reality right now, and not trying to fight that reality. So I think for so long I fought that reality of like, no, it's fine. Like, it's in my head. If I just push myself a little harder, I won't pass out. I won't get dizzy. Like, it was just constantly this battle of like, no, I'm just going to keep pushing myself without the proper guidelines or structure, I should say. Because, you know, you say I push myself now, and that's a great compliment. I think I don't see that as something I do, you know, that's extra. That's part of my personality. But I push myself, but I do take precautions. You know, I have Gatorade with me all the time. I always carry water with me. On my runs, I carry Gatorade, energy chews with electrolytes, like, you know, like all these things I carry with me, because just in case I get faint, I know what I need. You know, if it's to raise my electrolyte count, then I take my energy chews or my Gatorade or something like that, right? Like, but I take these precautions, so I'm not just like going blindly at it, which is what I was doing before, was going blindly at it and being like, okay, I'm just going to brute force this and it'll be okay. And I think reminding people that, like, no, take a minute, accept that this is your reality, and that you have two choices, right? Because it's up to you. You know, this is your reality, right? Like, if you fall down a flight of stairs and you're relatively healthy and really nothing else is underlying medically, you have two choices. You can say, okay, I'm going to wallow in my misery, or I'm going to take the steps to fix it. Now, what you do with that is up to you, right? It's your choice now to say, okay, I'm actually going to go and fix this. And I think that's what I did, was eventually, after it settled in and sunk in and was like, wow, this is my reality. Like, I can fall down a flight of stairs. Then I went and said, okay, what can I do next? Like, what steps do I need to take? You know, I didn't immediately take action, because taking action immediately, sometimes you're a little bit clouded in your perception of like, okay, what do I do? You're frantic. So I gave it like 12 hours, 24 hours, took a night's rest. Then the next day was like, wow, okay, let me reflect on this. What do I need to do now? Like X, Y, and Z. I need to take these steps to take better care of myself. And I think that's the biggest thing, is accepting that and letting it sink in. And I think some people forget to say, like, let it sink in. Some people are just like, oh, accept your reality. Well, okay, I can accept it and I don't have to let it sink in. But if you let it sink in, I think sometimes that grounds you in that, okay, this is reality. You know, this isn't fantasy. You know, it felt like a fantasy land, to be honest. When I passed out, I was like, oh, like, I see unicorns and rainbows. Like, what's going on? So yeah, I would definitely be like, you know, accept it and let it sink in. Don't just, you know, just brush it off.
Absolutely. Okay. So don't panic, accept the moment, let it sink in, and then push yourself forward with structure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Yujia, this has been absolutely awesome to have you on and to talk to you today. I just thank you so much for your time and just sharing your stories. This has been really, really great. I do just want to mention one thing that I know you had told me about. I know that you had written an article about some of your experiences for the Mighty. Am I getting that correct? The Mighty, and that's online. Okay. I'm going to put a link to that down below so people can read that.
Awesome.
I really want people to be able to just connect with your story and read more about your story. And I just am really excited in thinking about how you're continuing to push yourself forward, and you've just learned so many great things. And I know you're going to continue to share this with people. Thank you so much for being on today and sharing what you had to say.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I think a lot of what I do is advocacy in my own way. I mean, I'm not protesting and I'm not standing on the picket line fences and trying to protest laws and things like that. But if I can spread my story and help one other person realize that, like, it doesn't have to hold them back, more power to it, right? Because I believe the chronic illness and invisible illness community is one that's not spoken up for in the medical community, because not a lot of people know it. So if patients speak out and people with the condition speak out, then it makes it easier for other people to be like, oh, it's not in my head, and maybe this is actually a thing that I can go get seen for, and really bring those testimonies in to the medical field and really help advance medicine too.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That is exactly why we're here having this conversation. You nailed it.
Awesome.
Oh, Yujia, thank you so much. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Yujia Ding. If you want to be involved with the podcast, there are two ways for you to do that. First, if you have any questions you want answered or topics you want us to talk about, then click on the BEET Pain website link in the show notes and message me. Second, if you want to continue listening to great content and amazing guests, then I need your help to build the podcast and get those guests on the show. The bigger the podcast gets, the easier it is for me to bring on those guests. Subscribing, writing a review, and sharing this with others helps the show to grow. Thanks so much for listening.